Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another interview. And today I am going to be speaking with the lovely Paetra Tauchert, who is from Northern California. And she has written a fantastic article for the 2023 WellBeing Astrology, all about gardening and the moon. So very important information to have in this day and age. But before we get there, I just want to do a quick shout out to the magazine. It's available in Coles, Woolies, and newsagents in Australia. You can also order digital copies if you are overseas, and I'll pop all those links below. The articles here, we've got let me refresh myself. It's been a while. We've got lovely Gary Caton, Hilary Spiteri, Kelly Surtees, Wade Caves, Alicia Youssef, Alex Trenoith, myself, and many more. So there's comprehensive astrology for next year, horoscopes, there's articles, there's a moon calendar, all the things. So this is a pretty thick book. You can keep it on your bookshelf and reference it for years to come. I've got so many back issues myself. So all those details will be in the description where you can get your hands on a copy. But for now, I'd love to introduce Petra and talk about your article. But first, how did you tell us a little bit about your backstory of getting into astrology?
Well, in some ways, I feel like I kind of always was. Even as a kid, it just felt significant. So I always knew everybody's signs and birthdays. And then when I was 18, I met somebody who was deep into it. And that's when I learned that there was more than just sun signs. And I mean, I could reference everybody that was important to me in my life up till that point and then look at their charts, which was amazing. And it really honestly has always felt like remembering. Like it doesn't feel like
Mm.
adding new things. It's like this makes so much sense. And it felt like kind of a platform to step into or like a continent to step onto that just helped. I mean, I'm a multiple Virgo, so that desire to have a system to kind of organize life and understand people and myself was like just fit like a glove.
Mm. And so when you then progressed from just the star sign stuff, because, I have to admit, I was one of those people too. I'd kind of categorize people according to their signs. And then once you learn more astrology, it's just like, whoa. And so tell us a little bit about what you do in astrology at the moment. So obviously you're a fantastic writer. And so what else do you do?
Well, I also write for the Mountain Astrologer magazine. I have a column called Plant Planet there, and I teach. I teach a year-long course called Wheel of the Year that is astrology, plants, and magic. And then I also do a mentorship course that's 6 months long. And what else do I do? I do a lot of readings, and I write for social media. So I do an email regular weekly, missive that has kind of an overview of what's happening in the week and then the days. And then I post pretty consistently on Facebook and Instagram. And I particularly love, like, I have a Mercury Neptune square. And so I'm always trying to link the right and the left brains together. And I feel like, even as an astrologer with Mercury and Virgo in the 10th, I get overwhelmed by how many words there are with astrology. So I'm always
Mm.
trying to link the images with the words to give people another, visual kind of platform to understand what the message is of what I'm writing.
Mm. And that's what I love about the sign of Virgo. It's quite unique in the sense that though it's ruled by Mercury, it's an earth sign. So it is kind of like that connector between the sky or the mind and the practical realities. And yeah, if you do follow Petra on Instagram, there's always these beautiful images that you share on your stories as well, like the gardens and fairies and just little magical universe you create for yourself there. So with your article, you've given a lot of guidance to, I guess moon phases and ideal times to plant, the idea of reaping and sowing, very Saturnian as well. So if you wanted to, maybe like for someone who doesn't know a lot about gardening or needs or already has gardens and loves gardening and wants to perhaps incorporate some of the moon cycles, how would someone go about getting started in that?
Well, the concept being that the moon is the, nearest body to us that is governing the tides. So the tides being all bodies of water. So we see that in the ocean and in other bodies of water. We see it in the cyclical, the fertility cycle of women, but also within soil, within a pot, within, a garden bed, there's soil contained within that. So the moon is also pulling the tiny tides within the soil.
Mm,
And if what we're trying to do with a process oriented craft like gardening is to time things correctly to get the best, there are better and worse moments, some small, some giant, for doing things like this. If you're taking a seed that's basically dormant and you're trying to get it to strike and wake up, that is a process called imbibition, which means the seed uptakes water and then it begins to sprout its leaves and its roots. And so tying in with what the moon is up to is it's, wind in your sail. Either you're sailing against the wind or you're sailing with the wind.
yeah.
And so using the cycles of the moon, I mean, the signs are another layer, and that's really helpful. But if you were just going to do one thing or start somewhere, absolutely using the cycle. If it's a waxing moon, then there's a building of that water. So it's a time that you would want to be starting seeds. And
Mm,
then conversely, you get to the full moon and then we begin the waning cycle. It's time to do other things in the garden. It's not a time to be starting seeds. And there's a lot of empirical evidence of studying this that is actually very effective and helpful, and makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think a bit like the Mercury retrogrades, gardening by the moon is one of those things that's kind of like crept out of astrology a little more into the mainstream, because it's an
yeah.
old school thing. People have been doing it for a very long time that wouldn't consider themselves astrologers necessarily.
Yeah, well, it's just one of those pieces of ancient wisdom that sometimes is so pertinent, but we don't really understand where it comes from or what we lost the magic of it. I remember a person I used to know when I lived in Sydney. He was a really keen gardener, and he would sometimes reference the moon phases, but he would not really put together, I'm doing astrology or I'm doing magic in that sort of way. And I remember back in my early days, just something I would notice when I was just starting to learn astrology, if I watered my plants when the moon was in a water sign, they just seemed to feel like, like my peace lilies would just pop up quicker. They just seemed happier, and just, little ideas around that. So you also, in the article, you talk a little bit about different um, planets and their plants. And so, say, for example, you talk about, Saturn plants and Jupiter plants and Mercury plants, etc. So if somebody wanted to plant a particular plant, um, but obviously Jupiter, for instance, is only going to be in certain signs every 12 years. So would you maybe like look to maybe a moon Jupiter conjunction to plant that plant? Like, how would you work with slower moving bodies to kind of, extract that Jupiter juice, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely working with the moon or Mercury or somebody catalyzing the slower moving planets. Or, you could use the days of the week and
Oh,
align
yeah.
that with certain plants or times. I mean, there's so many macro and micro cycles in astrology that can be
Mm.
linked together effectively. But I think, yeah, that's I mean, that in a 1 month period, the moon is going to touch everything that's going on. And so if you're wanting to pull in that Jupiterian energy, you could do it at that point.
Fascinating. So do you get like the start of the month or what have you, and do you, like, with all those Virgo planets you were mentioning, do you then create a structure to, okay, this day I'm going to do this and then that day I'm going to do that? Or is it something that you feel your way into more intuitively? I mean, obviously you've been doing this for a long time, so I was just sort of curious to, at what point is it more of a structured type of situation versus just doing what the garden needs at various times? Because I would imagine there will be times where some things occur or you need to do in the garden that may not always be perfectly astrologically aligned neither.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because again, I have that Mercury Neptune square. So on the one hand, there's this very methodical approach, and then on the other hand, there's this just complete like where I mean, I feel like the plants talk to me, honestly. They tell me what
Mm,
they need. So if I'm at the beginning of the year, the beginning of the growing season, then there's going to be more of that Virgo that's going to come in because I need to get organized. I need to organize my seeds. I need to see what year are these, like how am I going to strategize where I'm going to start them and which part of the garden. And so it begins thusly. And then before very long, it's like, oh my God, that started in this. It's like I'm
yeah.
still always tracking what phase of the moon are we in. But there's certainly a point where it's just a riot of activity. I just like get out there and do the things.
So how often, like much time would you spend in your garden every day? Because you grow a lot of your own food, right?
At this point, yeah, it just kind of depends on the day, but I've created a life that allows me to spend quite a bit of time in the garden. I mean, I do garden design for some clients. Like my life is divided between astrology and garden design. And it's a nice, because astrology is very heady and it's a lot of sitting down and talking with
Yeah.
people. And so then it's nice to get out and just be like with myself and the plants and the cycles and all of that. So, I mean, at least an hour and sometimes 6 hours. It just depends. I mean, like when it is the peak gardening time, which it isn't now because everything's planted. Now I'm just getting to enjoy everything. But at the beginning of the year, it's like, oh my God, I get to go to the nursery, or those plants are ready to start, or I need to pot them up. I lose hours that way,
Yeah.
not in a bad way. Like it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so dirty and tired and happy. And like, wow, look at all this that I achieved. Because I have a Scorpio rising. So there's also this like transformative part of gardening that I really
Mm,
relish.
mm. Speaking to my Taurus planets, I haven't had a garden for a while. I'm like, oh, I miss the days where you just sort of be busting to see what's in bloom or what's sprouting or what's popping up under the dirt, from the dirt. It's all really
Yeah.
exciting to kind of give life to all of that. So how did you get into gardening originally and sort of combine these two elements?
My Venus in Taurus in the first house dad is very much a plant person, and he instilled that in me in a very young age that
Mm,
plants were important. I was learning botanical Latin when I was a really little kid.
wow.
And it just always, and then I did some traveling, just kind of some domestic traveling after high school before starting, the next phase of life, college and stuff. And I just paid attention to all the plants all the time. I would be like, oh, like I'm in a new town, but I know jasmine, I know lavender, I have some friends here already. And then at a certain point, I decided I was really ready to stop traveling because I really wanted to start a garden. Like I needed
Mm.
to be able to grow things. So I prioritize a lot around my gardens, that is something that I'm able to do in my life.
Yeah, and I think just with the way of the world and what's happening these days, some people are starting to get more connected to the idea of having something that they can um, use to sustain themselves is going to be an increasing priority moving forward. So, if somebody that's listening is in that category and they feel like they can't rely on the system or the current grid to sustain them, what tips would you offer to get started? Like, what would they need in terms of the supplies? Perhaps what do you think would be sort of a good garden to get started in terms of being able to provide like a relatively quick yield?
Potatoes and kale are a
Hmm.
really, really good place to start.
Yeah.
Potatoes are very generous and they're easy to grow. They need a certain amount of water, but they don't need a lot else. And kale is very satisfying. All the brassicas really, like the
Okay.
broccoli and collards and kale. I mean, there are things that you can direct sow also, which is really great. Like you can just get out there wherever your soil is. I mean, you need, like where I live, there's a lot of gophers. So we have to factor in that if
Sorry,
I
what's a gopher?
It's a small animal that lives under the ground that
Oh,
exists purely to suck down your plants.
oh wow. We might have them here, but known as something else. It might be a
Yeah.
lost in translation.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have a rodent that wants to eat the roots of your plants or disturb them, then you need to make sure that you have contingencies for that, such as
Mm,
raised beds that are lined with wire, or, a lot of people can plant in, I mean, there's different sorts of kits that you can get for raised beds that are pretty simple,
yeah,
or half wine barrels. That's something that's kind of nice. But I mean, honestly, I would say just get started. Like,
yeah,
you can just get a 1 gallon pot and get some good potting soil. What's the old adage? Spend 99 cents on the hole and 1 penny on the plant. You don't want to skimp on the soil. You want to give your plant as good of an environment to begin in as you possibly can.
yeah. Yeah, I even seen on Instagram, thanks to you, Petra, I've been following some more gardening accounts, and I seen one. You might have probably shared it. That's how I saw it. And it was like taking, I guess we would, for us, it would be maybe like a 4 liter um sort of bottle, and then you cut it in half and they become greenhouse, like little mini
Yes.
greenhouses that you can use to then sort of, I guess, incubate or nurture your babies until they're ready to go into something bigger.
Yeah.
So there's just so many little tricks and tools. So potatoes is a great start because they're so versatile. You can
Yeah.
do so many things. You can even make vodka if you wanted to,
Yeah, it's
like,
true.
which could also be your medicine, right? Like
It's true.
a first aid. I'm not just thinking about. I actually don't like vodka, but I'm a sucker for mashed potatoes. I mean, come on,
Mashed potatoes, French fries. I mean, what is not to
speaking
love?
to my Cancerian heart, all that comforting white foods. So potatoes and kale. Would there be anything else that you might suggest that?
Beans are really easy and
Yeah,
wonderful to grow. Peas are amazing. You can grow peas depending on where you live, of course. I can't deal with everybody's zones. If you go
yeah,
into a serious hard frost, then you're going to need to, or freeze, you'll need to wait until you get, or have a greenhouse, to do a little bit
yeah.
more. But even through very cold temperatures, peas will completely grow and
Oh
perform, as will
wow.
kale. The brassicas actually get sweeter. And in the sunnier times of the year, they're prone to aphids, those little, annoying insects. So that's one of the reasons that brassicas are grown largely in the winter. But beans are amazing. Like beans that you could grow all the way out to have hard beans that you would cook, in a pressure cooker. Green beans, quote, like the softer greens, those are so easy to grow and so satisfying.
Mm,
So, I mean, I heard today somebody talking about their grandfather talking about the Great Depression, and he said, we just kept living off of pinto beans. We just grew and
wow.
grew and ate pinto beans. So, if you have a 50-pound bag of pinto beans, you just might be okay.
Far out. Yeah. Um, I'm just imagining my little front patio with half wine barrels filled with plants now. And
Yes,
that's just so cute as
it's
well.
really adorable.
Yeah, really pretty. So yeah, that's very inspiring. Just to also, I think some of us, when we think of gardens, we just think about the visual component of it as well. And it's
Right.
not always easy. Like vegetable gardens and things generally are not that appeasing on the eye, in the way that we're sort of used to seeing a pretty garden. So, to be able to sort of zhuzh it up in terms of like a half wine barrel, like that's just really cute. I think that would look really nice. So, like, yeah, potatoes.
Yeah, well, there's also, the French intensive method is like, don't have your vegetables and your flowers be separate, like really bring it in. And that works with the
Mm,
concept of IPM, or integrated pest management,
yes, I
which
love that.
means that,
Yeah.
if you're growing a bunch of things that maybe are attractive to insects, but then you have some marigolds around the edge, the marigolds are a bit of a deterrent to
Mm,
the insects. So
yeah.
you have beauty, you have diversity, you like, the more diversity the better. The bigger problem is when you have these giant blocks of agriculture of just one thing. It's like, well, if it goes awry, it's going to go horribly
The whole
awry.
thing, like a locust type of situation. Yeah. It's so fascinating. And I've always been really curious about how, you could plant a herb next to that and then it takes care of itself, or
Yeah.
what have you. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yes.
concept of companion planting is really wonderful and can be,
Mm,
anybody can take the deep dive into that, because there are people that have tracked that for a long time. That's, I
mm,
feel like, a very important, again, having maximum wind in your sail.
yeah. And I even remember many moons ago doing a little experiment where we would take gray water from the washing machine. So we'd pump it
Yeah,
out and
yeah.
then use certain plants to clean that water as well. So a friend of mine was starting a permaculture farm for her grandchildren. And so we used to, in suburbia, we'd have these this little mini permaculture thing in the backyard. And yeah, and then we'd test the water and it was amazing. The plants would clean it for you. So provided you used decent detergent and not
Right,
overboard, like you'd still
right.
have to do it. Couldn't just use your commercial things. But yeah, it's like when you put your mind to it and you're willing to, I guess, bit of trial and error, there's really nothing you can't do for yourself.
It's true. I mean, and this is an era where ingenuity is going to be required. And
Mm,
I think that, for example, gray water going to fruit trees, that's a real classic kind of permacultural thing. And
mm,
permaculture being this concept of you are reducing ideally down to zero your inputs and your outputs. You have circular activity moving through everywhere. For example, like if you need nitrogen fertilizer, you can pee in a bucket, 10% pee to 90% water, boom, you've got a nitrogen fertilizer. If you're eating bananas and you have banana peels, throw them in a 5-gallon bucket and fill it up with water, leave it for a few days, and then you have a big hit of potassium.
yeah.
So you don't want to have to be hauling things away. Like, this modern concept of like somebody has a big, beautiful tree and all the leaves fall and then they rake the leaves and then they send them away. It's like, what are you doing? Like, that is your gold.
Yeah. I remember the days where in a former relationship, he would go and use the bathroom in a watering can in the shed. And he'd collect enough that he'd like dilute it. And he'd be like, oh, look how green the lawn is in this section. And
I mean,
it,
it works.
it sure does. Yeah. And I remember, probably being 20 go, oh, that's so gross. But when you see the results of it, yeah, it is just such, and you said that like the permaculture model is cyclic, you know what I mean? I'm like, hello, what else do we do in our life as astrologers that's very cyclic? So I think what you have to offer at this point in the timeline is so profound. You're experienced with it, you are um walking the walk and talking the talk at the same time. The fact that you're sustaining yourself in this model is very admirable, and I'm envious. And so I guess my question is, do you like the classes and things that you offer, do you do anything that is sort of permaculture or plant specific?
Well, the Wheel of the Year course is plant-based. There's always, I mean, it's less gardening than herbalism because I
Mm-hmm.
also have a background in herbalism.
Yeah.
And so, that's another thing that I feel like at this point is so important, like less dependency on the old allopathic model that is revealing itself to be not quite what it says it is. And so to be able to do tonic care. So Wheel of the Year teaches like tonic use of plants.
Yeah.
And then I have taught gardening by the moon through Kepler. So that's something that's out there. It's not an ongoing, and then let's see. I guess that's it. I mean, I'm not really linking permaculture exactly, although that could be next. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I would sign up. I just want a wine barrel with potatoes. Even just during the week, my son said, Mom, I'm a bit sick of mashed potatoes now. And I'm like, I only started eating them because of you. And I hadn't eaten them in
Right.
so long. I don't know, maybe just too many carbs or whatever. But I'm just finding them so satisfying,
Well, in
just
a
and
time of so
comforting.
much uncertainty, like never underestimate the power of comfort food. And it seems like potatoes might hold the central like
I mean,
pedestal of comfort
isn't
food.
that what the Irish, kept them alive?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for the humble potato.
Yeah, that's it. And medicinal, if you can distill it and all the things. So
Mhm.
yeah, and I think, when you can grow food, and it then can also become your medicine when you can, extract. I know sometimes even just during the day, if I feel a little bit flat or sluggish, I've got a massive rosemary outside, and so I just break a sprig off and bring it into my office, and I'm like, okay, it clears my mind, very clarifying. And I could be wrong, but I believe, is rosemary a mercury plant?
I believe it is a mercury plant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So yeah, that
it's
like essential oil bypassing what scent does, it bypasses the thought. It just goes right into the brain.
mm,
So that
mm,
enlivening quality.
yeah. I
It
mean,
also stimulates the memory.
yeah, okay, yeah, I think I remember that one. Yeah, I can never decide whether basil or rosemary is my favorite, but probably lean towards the rosemary because it's just so energizing and fresh and tastes great on potatoes.
It does. It's so good. Oh, I love
Roasted potatoes, bit of French butter. Oh yeah. Well, it's lunchtime where I am, so all I'm thinking about is potatoes. So, Petra, this has been so enlightening and wonderful, and hopefully this is really inspiring people to, you know, grow some food. And I think people do feel a bit overwhelmed. It's too much. I couldn't possibly have the variety or do what I would need to actually kind of be, semi off grid in terms of what you're consuming food wise. But imagine, like, if just, I got the half barrel and potatoes, my neighbor grew this and my neighbor grew that and my other neighbor grew that, and
Yeah.
can just do, sort of share in the goods, you know what I mean? And then that will give you sort of that nutritional variety as well as easing the boredom of potatoes.
Yeah, no, that's really, I mean, this whole concept of regional lifeboats is going to become increasingly important. And so, what can you grow? What can your neighbor grow? Also, I will add that direct sowing carrots and beets is really easy, also, as long as you have soil that is, they're both roots essentially, they're
I see, you
modified.
mean like striking them?
No, just literally instead of having to either buy them at the nursery or start them somewhere else and then transplant them, you can just be like, here's my wine barrel. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 lines or whatever, the half wine barrel like allows for, and then just sprinkle your little seeds in there and cover them up. And then you're going to need to thin them because they'll be a little bit thick, but you can eat baby carrots and you can eat baby
Oh,
beets.
yeah. So the turnaround time would be pretty quick as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's some good, just carrots and potatoes.
Oh, soul food, because I
Yeah.
mean, I know, like, those orange things are so good when you're feeling a lack of vitality and you
Yeah.
need, that, like, to get a bit of a solar hit. Something that's kind of orange can be
Yeah.
really good to eat. I know myself when I'm feeling a little bit meh, I'll go and, I'm just hoeing in carrots because I just, my body is just like needing that kind of solar energy. So, which is sort of weird because they're underground, but yeah, I find that the carrot can be very enlivening in that way. And baby carrots, so sweet and beautiful.
They're delicious. Yeah. I mean, that
Mm,
concept of eating the rainbow is real. The bioflavonoids are found, they're higher in those kind of foods. I was going to say cabbage, purple cabbage is another pretty easy plant to grow through the winter. And so
mm,
imagine you have your beets and you have, so you have this like magenta, you have a purple carrot or cabbage and then an orange carrot. It's like doing pretty
like
well.
a chili sauerkraut. Oh yeah,
That sounds so good.
warms the cockles of your heart, and then also can be very like probiotic as well for the
Yeah.
tummy, from a digestive perspective. So
Yeah.
um lettuce, I believe, is very quick as
Lettuce
well.
is incredibly easy to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and sunflowers too. I mean, you're not necessarily going to like survive a famine with sunflowers, but if we're trying to have variety and we're trying to bring in pollinators and we're also bringing in beauty and joy, like who does not love a sunflower?
Oh,
You can
No.
just pop a sunflower in and be like, "Oh my god, it's Jack and the Beanstalk."
Yeah, and just like waking up and seeing a bright smiling face at you, like it's just so so beautiful. There's a lady who lives on the corner and she's has sunflowers, and when my son was little and we'd always be at the park, it was just beautiful to see these, you know, big plants kind of smiling at you from over her fence. It was great. Well, I think like we could talk about food and gardening for a really long time, but I just want to thank you for your wonderful work in this article, for sharing some of your knowledge. We'll
My
put
pleasure.
links. So, do you have a website?
I do, it's paetratauchertastrology.com.
Fantastic. So, we'll get links and stuff all about that in the show notes. And
Mhm.
hopefully, this has inspired some of you to, you know, get a wine barrel and some potatoes.
Do it,
Or,
people.
yeah,
Do it.
you won't regret it, you know.
You won't, you never will. It's a wonderful acquaintanceship. I mean, just being connected to growing things, let alone that it can keep you alive. Like, what a combo.
Yeah, I remember many moons ago, I bought a house, and I remember a friend sort of came over and started to get a garden growing. He says, "Well, unless it flowers or fruits, there's no point." So
Yeah.
definitely good advice. You know, the flowers or the fruit.
Mm.
There was another thing I wanted to mention, but I've lost it. But oh yeah, you know, particularly with the upcoming astrology, you know, Mars retrograde in Gemini, Saturn in Aquarius, just this, you know, a lot of people that I've been speaking to are just feeling so mentally frazzled, fatigued, hitting that proverbial digital wall. I mean, what a great um remediation to get
Exactly.
back to nature, get your hands dirty, grow something of substance, and really just connect back to the life cycle, you know, something that you
Agreed.
grow and sustains you. Oh, Taurus delights.
Taurus delights.
Yeah, love them. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, what a joy. Thank you, Cassandra. It's been really super nice to talk to you.
And you too. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that. And we'd love to hear in the comments, what are you growing or what you'd like to grow, or if you've been inspired to start growing like I have been. So until next time, have a great day.